Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There is more information on the website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 33,616 people from 160 countries, and it's supported by 466 organizations. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including 53 country contexts, engaged in defending women's rights. Please join us as a volunteer. Today, we're going to have an interview with the feminist La Scapigliata. This is a nickname she chose to have in order not to disclose her real identity, the word of the century, I guess. And later on, we will hear from our American sisters, Dansky, Lierre Keith, and Jesika Gonzalez, who had a terrible incident this week. We also would like you to know that there has been an attack on our sister, our Mexican sister, Laura Lecuona. She has been hounded by transactivists. She had to cancel a presentation of her upcoming book at the book fair in Guadalajara. So we have a support letter for her in our website, which you can find at the resources section. Read it and please share it. So I'm going to start the webinar now by introducing our friend Zan, who's going to be interviewing La Scapigliata. She wrote a book under the pseudonym, the nom de plume Isidora Sanger. As I said, she doesn't want to disclose her real name. And they are going to be talking about her recent published book, which is called Born in the Right Body, Gender Identity Ideology from a Medical and Feminist Perspective. Thank you very much for being here, and over to you, San and Isadora. I'm delighted to have you here with us.
All right, so my first question, La Scap, how are you today?
Oh, I'm all right, thanks. I got a little bit of asthma, so I apologize in advance if I sound a bit breathy, but I will try my best. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me here. It's a real honor.
We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks.
Okay, so, I was wondering, well, the book, first of all, is written in chapters, but really it's a collection of wonderful essays. You can jump in at any point. But how did you come to write the book? What was your process?
Well, I started looking into this issue around 2012, which is when I noticed this new phenomenon of not only men identifying as women, but the whole society going along with it as it's a real thing. And also I noticed that the violence towards feminists, and especially feminists who will not validate these identities, escalating online. Soon after, I became aware of what was being done to children via pediatric gender reassignment. And around 2016, I joined Twitter. And at that time, it was very difficult to really comprehend the enormity of what was happening behind the scenes. So we were just seeing the surface of it. And on the surface, there were a lot of really strange and incomprehensible claims that seemed to be supported by the medical and legal establishment. So being a doctor, that interested me because in medicine, we always look at things that are not necessarily our business. We're not specialists in it. We trust that our colleagues who are specialists in the area are going to adhere to the ethics and, follow evidence. And, we trust that they will do the right thing. But it was just starting to really not make much sense. And the essays I started to write in order to clarify to myself, it was pretty much my own thought process, following evidence, following logic, trying to figure out what is happening. During that whole journey, I met a lot of people, a lot of other healthcare professionals who kept reaching out. And at one point, they started asking me to put everything in one place so that it's shareable, rather than posting links to my various threads and essays and whatnot. So I decided to put it together. And then by that stage, 2020, 2021, a lot has changed since, when I first started writing. So I thought, let's update everything. And then I've come across a lot of research, a lot of other sources that helped me understand. So I decided to reference it all. And then I thought, well, might as well just make it into a book. And that's basically how this happened. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. So in the first essay, entitled "About," in quotes, "trans women are women," end quote, you discuss how, in quote, "trans women," end quote, two words came about. So in that, just to preface that, the trans women in that quote, second quote, well, both quotes are two words. So would you talk about this two words versus one word thing with the notion of trans women?
Yes. When I first started looking into this, they were still referred to as trans women, one word, and no one was confused about the fact that these were men, and the fact that sex can't be changed. People, understand that, I think. And there was no ambiguity about who we are talking about, who is, behaving in this way, what these men are asking, such as, that we refer to their neogenitals as vaginas and to women's actual vaginas front holes. I think that was possibly Planned Parenthood leaflet that I saw. And however, very soon after, I started seeing that it was no longer good enough to refer to these men as trans women. You had to now call them trans women. And women were being, told off and called bigots for still writing it as one word. And soon after, the argument that trans women are women, just like tall women, disabled women, Black women, that's what we started to hear from trans activists. And then our attempt to explain why men are not women and why we're not the same, whatever we call each other, because women are female and trans women are male. Trans activists use that separation of trans and women to then assert that because women are female and trans women are women, then trans women must be female too. And at this point, quite rapidly, institutions started using words such as menstruator, cervix, heaver, birthing body, all those dehumanizing terms for women, cis women as well. We were no longer women, we were cis women, and suddenly everyone had to refer to these trans women as just women, and we were cis women or menstruators or chest feeders. And it's become apparent to me at that point why the separation was necessary. And then that was a very clever linguistic sleight of hand that has turned out to be extremely destructive, because you no longer were allowed to say what women are, because female biology was separated from the word woman, and you were now transphobic if you even tried to talk about female biology, just like you were considered transphobic if you tried to say that, no, I'm sorry, but these men are not women, women are adult human females. So I decided to kind of open the book with that essay, just discussing various aspects of how this change in language affected both the category of these males as well as the women's rights.
Great. Yeah, I know throughout the book, you always return to the language, co-opting of language, right? It's just, yeah. Okay, let's see. Later you discuss the medical implications of gender dysphoria, body dysmorphic disorder, and eating disorders. So how are these related? I don't understand how they're related.
Well, there are many different ways in which they are related, but one of the ways that I think is the clearest is that all of these psychiatric phenomena tend to affect adolescents, and particularly adolescent girls. they, if you think, I don't know what generation everyone is listening to this chat, but when I was in high school, everyone was bulimic or anorexic or aspiring to be. That was the social contagion that was affecting girls. Today, I think there are graphs that will show how diagnosis of anorexia and bulimia and eating disorders have just dropped off to nearly zero, whereas at the same time, the diagnosis of gender dysphoria has skyrocketed. And adolescent girls, again, now constitute about 70% of referrals to gender clinics. So it appears that because psychiatric phenomena are not necessarily, they're not set in stone. There is no, they're descriptive. They are terms that are based on phenomenology, on observing symptoms, how they affect people. And these things can change. And psychiatric symptoms are shared between different, mental conditions. So both eating disorders and body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria seem very disproportionately focused on modifying the body in an attempt to alleviate psychological distress. They are characterized by psychological distress, which is focused on the body in some way or form. And with it's not hard to see why that is. It's because often, like with eating disorders, we've known that in reasonably chaotic situations, maturing girls in a sexualized society, suffering trauma, dysfunctional homes, there is not a lot of control that adolescent girls have over their environment. But one way that they can exert control is perhaps over their bodies. So it becomes something to displace all of this sense of helplessness and confusion and angst and focus on something that they can intervene and achieve a semblance of control in their lives. And I think whether now you're seeing a lot of psychiatric comorbidities in adolescents diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and one of the main ones are eating disorders, but also autism and anxiety, depression, trauma, family dysfunction. And that is very similar to what was happening with eating disorders in the past. So I think we give things labels, and these labels have shifted, but in essence, I think these three phenomena are related. And one of the things as a doctor that really interested me is that we are not going around saying to anorexics, yes, of course you're fat, and here is liposuction to, sort out your feeling of distress about being fat. We don't do that because it would seriously harm anorexic girls. So why are we going to girls who are claiming to be boys and saying, yes, of course you're a boy, and here is a double mastectomy? It just makes absolutely no sense. Yeah. And yet our trans activists are very clear about trying to silence and demonize anybody who draws those parallels. So
Wonderful. Yeah. I made a lot of notes about the essay, Transgender Medicine as Departure from First Principles. First of all, could you explain what first principles are? This is a medical term.
Well, I think first principles refers to reasoning from first principles, generally speaking, and it is the way you approach any problem. You break it down to its constituent parts, go down to the basics, and then you ask pertinent questions, you look at evidence, and then you formulate an opinion. But so medicine is very much based on this kind of reasoning. We encounter a lot of things that are very familiar to us. We learn pattern recognition, we make spot diagnosis, but often we encounter things we're not really clear about what is going on. And regardless of your specialty, every doctor can just resort back to that first principles thinking to just look at the problem critically and assess it and decide what's the best course of action. But I think to my mind, the main first principle of medicine is the ethical principle of first doing no harm. Right. And because as you can imagine, medicine is actually quite a potentially harmful discipline. We use poisons in certain doses and in order to, cure illness or alleviate pain. But if they're given erroneously for, and in something that is not the right indication, if they're given in excess amounts, they can harm patients. Surgery is very brutal. It opens the body up, it cuts it, it removes parts. In any other context, it would be seen as horrific violence. But in medicine, if it's done appropriately, it is in fact life-saving. So medicine is a very powerful tool. And if it's misused, it can actually cause a lot of harm, which is why, the first principle is to first do no harm. So when we're looking at sorry, go on.
Let me add to that, because in this essay you use some of the headings are disorder versus difference, normal versus abnormal, good versus bad outcomes, body versus mind. So could you touch on some of those in terms of this idea of first principles?
Yeah, I mean, that was referring to gender dysphoria. So it is a novel diagnosis that has replaced gender identity disorder. And current diagnosis is heavily rooted in gender stereotypes and how people who don't conform with gender stereotypes are in some way, and then desire to present as the opposite sex, how they should be affirmed and given these very drastic medical interventions. So from the first principle, first do no harm, that immediately rings bells. And looking at how gender dysphoria is framed, so in disorder versus difference, there is a lot of conflation about what is a disorder, what is the difference. So, for example, males and females, men and women, they're different by design. Mm-hmm. That's not a disorder.
Right.
Right. Disorder is, in fact, something that is abnormal, that limits function, and, that affects the quality of life. So, a pathology is what a disorder is. Being female is not a pathology. However, I've seen insurance companies frame female chest as an abnormal, as a congenital abnormality, right, in girls who identify as boys. Mm-hmm. And then the reasoning leads to them recommending mastectomies to adolescents in order to reconstruct normal male chest, So mm-hmm. in that section, I talked about the conflation of disorder and difference, and how it is, again, part of the linguistic reversal in order to justify these interventions. In terms of normal and abnormal, again, I focused on HRT. It is, everyone knows, women will know, hormone replacement therapy. And in men, if they have the testicles removed and they need testosterone, or if they have disorders of sex development with low testosterone, testosterone is then replaced to what would be normal physiological level for that sex. Same with women, HRT. In menopause, estrogen drops and sometimes causes symptoms, and we replace the hormones in order to bring it up to what were physiological levels before the symptoms occurred. However, the transactivists have turned it around to claim that feminizing doses of estrogen given to men so that they can develop breasts and try to mimic female appearance are also hormone replacement therapy. Mm-hmm. So it's not, because it's not replacing the hormones that were there and now aren't due to aging or disease. Right. But it has been reframed in such a way so that it can then be claimed that it is a life-saving treatment, so that it can be claimed that it's just the same as prescribing estrogen to menopausal women, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I explored, I think, that in that section.
Great. You want to talk about another one, or let's move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I can go on. So you
I know. I know. We've already talked about these things. It's like, just read the book. Actually, it's very readable. I mean, I'm not a medical professional, and even with the medical terminology, it still really is very poignant and easy. I would say interesting in a wonderful way. Let me ask you about the essay, The Imposter Fantasy. So mm-hmm. you get into the internet as facilitating this sort of decoupling of body reality and the projected self, this idea of be whoever you want to be in 2022. And, in the early 2000s, I was a researcher. I was researching online spaces. And this was the early 2000s, 2005, 2007. through the mid part of the century there, the decade there. This was before social media platforms really, had really taken off. And role play was just part of it. It's always been a big part of online culture. So you fast forward to 2022. Do you think this ideology could have taken root in reality, right? Because it's in reality, if the internet had not existed or had evolved differently? Kind of complex question, but.
Well, I don't know how else the internet could have evolved. But yes, I absolutely think that without internet, we would not be here with regards to this problem. I think internet has played several different roles in making this happen. It has led to mainstreaming of pornography, which is implicated in men self-identifying as women. They often credit sissy porn and whatever with discovering that they were really women, whatever. And also young girls are growing up in a very objectifying society where they're also exposed to this hookup culture, and becoming a woman is more stressful, more dangerous than it has been when I was young. But internet has also, I think, people have always fantasized about being someone else. That's not uncommon, but internet has it's decoupled us from interactions in real life. And I think you can see that people interact online a lot more, or significant proportion of their interaction is online now, whereas in the past, it just wasn't an option. So now people are able to filter themselves and their opinions and their personas through filtered photographs, avatars, written rather than verbal communication. And normally humans get a lot of their cues from body language, and we are basically used to being in the same room with each other if we're going to speak, or speaking one-on-one over the phone. This visual component of make-believe and increasingly sophisticated games where people who identify as the opposite sex, particularly men, can assume these female personas. And I think our brains are not necessarily that well equipped to tell the difference anymore, especially when this graphics and real life interaction in real time is coupled together. So I think also it's easier for people to just believe someone when a man claims to be a woman. It's easier to believe that if he's sitting behind an anime avatar or heavily photoshopped picture, as opposed to sitting next to a 6'4" man looking pretty sketchy, claiming that he's a woman. There is an absolute awareness immediately in real life of issues that you might not at all connect with cognitively if you are interacting with that man online and discussing these problems. So I think it's led to a lot of people falling for these narratives, whereas if they were allowed to form their opinions on this in real life purely, I think transactivists would not have gotten this far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I noticed it really early on, the whole absence of the paralinguistic features that go along with just talking to a person, that you can tell immediately if they feel how they feel, what they're thinking by looking at them, by looking at their body. It's all missing. And it's been an adjustment for those of us that were around before the internet. You discussed Darvo with a case study. Could you explain the acronym and why it's so important?
Well, Darvo is a reaction that perpetrators of abuse often use when somebody, and often their own victim, tries to hold them to account. So they will deny. D stands for deny the accusations. A stands for attacking the victim or the person who is trying to hold them to account. And RVO stands for reversing victim and offender. So the way this plays out, I will just use an example that is familiar to all of us, which is feminists and women who fight for single-sex spaces being framed as abusers, Nazis, bigots by men who are in fact demanding access to women-only spaces like prisons or toilets, even in situations where a man has raped a woman or attacked her. Trans activists will make it look like they will minimize it, or they will still claim that that man is more of a victim than a woman who was in fact victimized because that woman tried to hold him to account. I mean, if you look at J.K. Rowling, there was a really horrible example. She published a children's book and she wanted to allow some children to send drawings so that that can be included and then proceeds sent to charity. And it was a wonderful initiative, and parents of children were posting their photos on J.K. Rowling's threads. And J.K. Rowling has been attacked by trans activists in this way, framed as an abuser and framed as a bigot and whatnot for a long time. And then trans activists were posting pornographic images on that thread and claiming that it is the J.K. Rowling who was a groomer and a pedophile because she allowed children to see it, whereas it was them, in fact, who were posting these images. No one else was exposing children to anything, but it was reframed. And that is a classic example of Darvo. Wrongdoers will blame the victim and will try to shift focus from their own bad behavior. And now the onus is on the victim. Victim is suddenly framed as some kind of an abuser, bad faith person. I mean, anyone who's looked at female survivors of sexual violence trying to hold their abusers to account, this plays out over and over again. Mothers with abusive partners in court, you know, the male partners will try to frame them as the real abusers and themselves as victims. So it's a very common mechanism, and I just thought that it's worth explaining it using some real life examples in order to really clarify why is it women who are both being attacked, whose rights are disappearing, who are also then framed as abusers, whilst men who are abusing them and taking their rights are being framed as the most vulnerable minority in history.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. You have a title in your 17th essay. It's titled "Myth of Asexuality." Could you talk a little bit about that?
What made me notice it is that I think LGBT plus organizations have recently announced this novel new identity, which they're adding to their acronym and their activism, and they're supposedly human asexuals, or ACEs, they call them. And it's actually quite difficult to figure out what they mean by that, because one of the ways that these people who claim to be asexual present themselves on social media or even in the media is in quite sexual ways. You will find articles with women claiming to be asexual whilst presenting in, seductive lingerie or seductive poses. There are lots of stories about how wonderful these asexual women are, who, even though they have no sexual desire, they are still very sexually active with their husbands or boyfriends or clients even. And it really made no sense whatsoever, because, as you know, from a medical perspective, humans are not asexual. Asexual reproduction is not what we are about. We are all sexual beings. It's just one of the basic functions. So whether it's in language or in context of this new novel identity, it just didn't make sense. But what really shocked me, apart from the fact that this was the whole new way of presenting females submitting to male sexual desires, even if they don't enjoy it, as, an identity. What really stopped me in my tracks is when I saw some doctors who were promoting pediatric gender reassignment, saying that children who are known to lose sexual function, lose any interest in sex because of the drugs they were given, such as puberty blockers, that they're not that's not a side effect of drugs, but in fact that's just simply because these children were asexual to begin with. And I realized that there could be quite a sinister reason why this new identity is now being promoted in order to just cover up the iatrogenic harm of these medication caused harm. as a part of this ideological medical treatment.
How does a feminist lens complement your understanding of the medical approach to gender dysphoria?
I don't think that you can really understand phenomenon of gender dysphoria and the social, contagion and the capture of public with self-ID without the feminist lens, because I think it's all very much rooted in misogyny, sexism, and homophobia. The mere changing of people's sex stems from sexologists and doctors in the past considering same-sex attracted people abnormal and wanting to convert them to the straight members of the opposite sex. But also, if you want to understand this contagion phenomenon and why so many girls are suddenly identifying as boys, and if you even just want to understand gender dysphoria itself, if you look at the criteria, gender stereotypes of masculinity and femininity are all over it. And I don't think that anyone apart from feminists really pays much attention to gender stereotyping and the effect of gender as a social construct, as a social hierarchy, as Lierre Keith said. And I've never forgotten her saying that, because that was very powerful.
Yeah.
About gender being not a binary, but a hierarchy. That really just made it very possible for me to see through a lot of obfuscations and justifications and newspeak, and see that this is all really about sexism and homophobia, driven by sexism and homophobia, and push for a greater gender conformity and taking rights of women away and giving it to a group of men who are now allowed to police women from within female sex class. So that really helped.
What's going on is that these institutions, serious institutions, governments, the UN are dead set on normalizing it, like making it normal and right. So
I think they're dead set on normalizing it because they've been bamboozled into thinking that a document called Yogyakarta Principles, which was first published in 2006 and then updated in, I think, 2019. It was done by a bunch of lawyers, and basically it was like a wish list of a transvestite lobby and transsexual lobby, men who wanted to equate it with sexual orientation and use it to achieve this exact thing. This was never ratified by the UN, but it was presented to governments as something that is legally binding. And I think civil servants just, not looking closely enough and not having good enough legal guidance, presume that this is now how things have to be. And then they're quite good at pushing the policies which they think they have to push. And I think that's how we got here, rather than people just going, oh yeah, this is totally legit, we really believe in this. No, I think it was presented to them as something that has to be done.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, as some kind of factually based, yes, phenomenon. Yeah, exactly, right.
You have doctors doing this, you have lawyers agreeing that this is human rights issue. Well, who the hell do you think you are to say no? You've got to do what law tells you. And I think Gender Recognition Act in the UK just deepened, prepared. I think it prepared the ground. There are feminist lawyers who are exploring this topic right now. Actually, I think Alessandra Asteriti is writing a lot about it. So if anyone wants to look her up, she will have a lot of good thoughts on it.
So my last question is, what can medical professionals and the rest of us do to address these issues?
Well, I think medical professionals need to remember their training, and they need to start looking at this issue critically, and they need to remember first, do no harm, because I think anyone who is educated to a level that they pass their exams will immediately realize that this is not ethical, what is being done to people. Sex can't be changed. This is harming people. And also 50% of the patients are women. They're now terrified of going into hospital, of being assaulted and abused. And then on top of everything, called transphobic bigots by staff, just because they are objecting to a sexually inappropriate male who is pretending to be a woman in the bed next to them. So, medical professionals, they do have a responsibility towards female patients as well as towards quote unquote trans patients. So they need to remember their basic training and medical ethics. But at the same time, it is very difficult to oppose this because, for example, in the UK, the NHS is completely captured by this ideology and, being put through a disciplinary process, being mobbed at work. There are nurses who try to hold the line, who lost their jobs. It's not easy. We're in the recession. So people just need to remember that they have a job to do, that they need to stay in the jobs where they are. But at the same time, whenever it's comfortable for them to discuss things with colleagues, to get involved with their respective colleges, to ask pertinent questions. If someone tells you trans women are women, then ask them what makes them women, what makes a trans woman different from a man. And then when they get a reply about gender identity, say, okay, fine, what is gender identity? How do you know whether I have a gender identity? What is this quality that you are hinging everything upon? So I think that I would recommend medical professionals to just be critical, a little bit brave, and to think about all of their patients, including women. And as for the rest of us, I think general public has been working so hard to undo this, what I think is primarily a medical scandal, that, it pains me as a doctor that, medical profession has failed to safeguard patients, and that it's fallen on members of the public to sound alarms and write petitions and crowdfund and etc. So I'll just say, carry on, keep doing what you're doing already, and just look after yourselves, because this is a long fight, and it's expensive and it's hard. And yeah, I think we'll get there together in the end.
Why did you self-publish? I mean, people are asking those kind of questions. Where can I get the book, and who's the publisher? And they said, well, it was self-published. Do you want to talk about why you self-published?
Well, I received the feedback from someone in the publishing industry that essays are difficult to publish, but also a suggestion to rewrite it focusing purely on the medical side of things. And to me, that basically meant remove the feminism out of it, take it out. And when I looked at other books that have come before this one, I've seen women having to use pronouns she for men, having to cede language, having to defang their analysis on this. And also, if someone actually takes on your book, it takes quite a while for that book to hit the shelves. So I thought, all things considered, it was extremely important to me to not compromise on feminism, not compromise on language. And also I felt that it was really important to get it out as soon as possible, because things were really heating up in terms of the battle between the feminists and trans lobby, and that institutions were at that moment still unclear about what is happening. And I thought I could perhaps help by offering a document that has resources and evidence to help things along. So I just, on a balance of, things, I've just decided I'll just carry on and do it. So I've self-published on Amazon. There are no typos in it. I made sure it's well edited, and the paperback looks good. There is also a Kindle. So it's available for everybody.
What can we do about the medical profession creating perpetual transparent trans patients, and also explain to doctors that trans are practicing fetish? Why are physically doctors going along with the mental health doctors who are no longer in charge of the asylum? That's a couple of few questions.
Well, I think let me think, which essay is that? Possibly essay 19, the really big one, where I talk about the Yoga Carta and all sorts of things, including medical autonomy. I think you'll find that there is actually a lot of pushback within the medical profession, and colleges, at least in the UK, some of them are starting to distance themselves from these treatments. So also Tavistock Clinic, Pediatric Gender Reassignment Clinic, is to shut down. And we've had some reviews. It all probably looks very mild on the surface, but in medicine, it is huge, because we are all programmed to support each other and to, defer to each other's authority, and to actually rebel against self-declared authority of these doctors who are operating in these fields is quite a big thing. So I think doctors are already talking, and women and other people and patients, they should, speak to the doctors if it feels comfortable. But I would just warn that if you need medical help, that is most important. And even if people have lost their heads in terms of gender reassignment, they're still well trained medically, and we have seen women denied medical treatment because they objected to these ideologies. It's just not worth to risk your own healthcare. But if you're comfortable, if you're not depending on anyone treating you at that moment, then yeah, by all means, challenge your doctors, talk to them about reality of sex, remind them of what they already know, and don't let them refer your children to these places, because they're not under control yet. Ethical medicine has not really taken hold in that field. So I would really caution anyone from referring children to gender specialists, and to instead just refer them for supportive mental health care instead.
Super. Well, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, Zan.
And we are now to hear from our sisters in the United States. We're going to meet Lierre Keith, Jesika Gonzalez, and Dansky, who are about to tell us about what happened on Monday today. They have chosen to call this section "Non-Violent Women Attacked by Transactivists in California." We have a video for you, and then we will hear directly from them.
And they need to be talked about. Public needs to know how violent they are, and how many times people do not get the help if they're going to be brought back into society. They come back in worse. So my question is, I recognize this person as a man, and I'm sorry that the travesty occurred to her victims and herself. But do you think that it's justice if she's put in a violent with other men because they're stronger?
We are not out here to engage right now with the public. We're doing a silent protest, but you can go to the website of this organization and you can read all about it, and we will dialogue with you. We're not going to do it today.
I did read about it briefly here.
Okay.
And I do have criminal justice.
We're open to it. We're just not doing that today.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do have that education. Oh, I got to ask you. Whoa. What's this about? Why are we doing this? They're violent. They're violent men. You. This is me. Why are we doing this?
These are violent men. These are violent men. They're violent men. They just had fun. Yeah, these are the men that we like to not have to be in prison with. So.
What the hell?
Who did you think they were? Yeah, this is what they think they do. So I don't know why you would think anything. I just quite can't think.
I don't get that. Why did they took your sign?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Oh my God, freedom of expression. Who are these people?
Yes.
Holy
Yes.
crap.
And
I didn't even plan on being here. Thank you for being here. Holy
Hey,
crap.
buddy. Hey, buddy.
What we're up against. And this has happened in Portland, in Tacoma, in
Why can't we have a
Chicago,
dialogue?
in New York.
Why can't we have a dialogue?
I
Sorry.
Hello.
Holy crap. I wasn't prepared for that.
I'm so sorry you were in the midst of it.
This is what we're talking about.
People.
Really hate women.
Why can't you just have a dialogue? I'm sorry, he's very friendly.
I know, I'm just not a dog
I'm sorry.
person.
No, it's okay. We love your dog. It's okay.
So I know about
What?
this.
What in the world?
This is why we're here. And this is what they do to us when we try to speak.
You know what Dana Rivers did?
I got some of it, but
Three people. She killed. Yes.
She killed 2 lesbians. And took their clothes off.
and then I flipped it. Some
Well,
of
that's a
them
very
are
tragic
aftermath.
person. Yes.
The woman 28 times in the face.
I just briefly read about it, and I don't know the extent of the case. You know, I don't know.
You have eggshell on you.
Eggs, so they're not vegans, and some kind of stuff.
Well, you have a little bit, you're bleeding a little bit, a teeny tiny bit, you're bleeding. Yeah, where the, oh no, it's not like bleeding out, but there's a scratch. I can see blood on your face. Yeah.
I have Q-tips. I'm fine. I wanted to just get evidence. Okay. Yeah. It's in her ears. So.
I understand. You're right about that. I just give the actual description of where we are. You have the right to speak out. Okay, we're right across the street. You're right. But that's one of the primary rights of America.
Yeah, I agree.
What the hell's wrong with you? I can't believe they did that.
Welcome, sister.
City to city, city to city. This is what they do all over. And as you see, we were standing there. Someone who knows the area, what is this called? I know. There's right here.
It's the Alameda.
She's saying that we've got the Embarcadero. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
Well, it's impressive every time I say it. So, as I said, we have with us Lierre Keith, Jesika Gonzalez, and Dansky. They are going to talk to us in that order to tell us about what happened on one day to them.
I have never been so proud of a group of women. We did so good. So I'm going to talk about before. Jesika is going to talk about what happened during, and then Kara's going to talk about what we've done since and what our plan is moving forward. So in the beginning, in 1980, I will go very fast, I read Mary Daly and I became a radical feminist. So it had never taken me 6 months to read a book. It took me 6 months to read gynecology, and I launched fully into being a radical feminist. So the thing is, it was 1980, right? So in the early 80s, when I found radical feminism, I got an incredible political education just from joining all the different feminist groups that I could find. So there were seminars and workshops and women's bookstores and conferences and festivals. Anything that you wanted, you could find. There was just this entire culture that was based on political resistance that, you know, I just stumbled into at age 16, 17, and I never looked back. I got everything I needed out of that movement. There was always somebody in the room who could explain to you what was wrong with capitalism. There was somebody in the room who could tell you what is the connection between masculinity and militarism. There was somebody in the room who would walk you through the rape of the wild and the rape of women. We had a complete framework to explain everything that was wrong with the world, and we were right. We also had very specific trainings about how to be an activist. I personally went to Greenham Common, and I also went to Seneca, which was the US version of the same thing. I've been arrested 6 times doing civil disobedience. And I'm saying all this because it became very clear to me a few years ago that women are joining this movement, and that's fabulous. And I'm not saying this as a criticism. It's just an observation. We don't have any of that anymore. So women join maybe for one issue, and they sort of bump into the rest of these ideas, maybe if they're lucky, but they're definitely not getting political training. And we're reinventing the wheel over and over again. So when I think about, for instance, the civil rights movement, I mean, they very specifically had a place called the Highlander Institute, the Highlander Folk School, and it was based on the Danish folk school movement. And they set up in 1932 in Tennessee, and their goal was to train labor activists, but it became clear very quickly that the center of action was really the civil rights movement to stop segregation and voting rights and all of this stuff. So they were like the nerve center of the civil rights movement. And you could name anybody from the luminaries to the foot soldiers, they had probably been through Highlander. So Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, the 4 guys who did the first sit-in in North Carolina, Ralph Abernathy, all of them had been, John Lewis, they'd all been through Highlander. And which is to say that, you know, we can bring all our passion and all our courage, but if we don't have training, if we don't understand the plan, it's a lot harder to get where we're going. They all had that training. And I got that training, you know, again, more informally, but through what radical feminists and lesbian feminists were doing in the 80s. And it's just not there anymore. So I feel a great deal of urgency about this, seeing how things are going out there in the United States. So, okay, this slide that we're looking at, this is from the book that I co-authored called Deep Green Resistance. And this is our taxonomy of action. So over on the left are all the ways that you can refuse to do something that your government, your church, your society, your whoever is trying to get you to do. So those are acts of omission. So strikes, walkouts, tax resistance, conscientious objectors, all this kind of stuff, ways that you can withdraw from the system. And then you have acts of commission. So these are things that you can do to try to interrupt the flow of power, to try to educate, to try to build movements. And finally, at the very end of that, way over on the right, you have direct confrontation and conflict. So actually joining the fight. There at the very bottom, you can see there's this sort of slider, like over with lobbying and protests, you need more people to make it effective. Over on the other end, you need fewer people, but it's a lot more risky. Okay, there's a lot more danger involved when you're actually doing a direct confrontation with power. So that's sort of, you know, the slider that you're on at any given moment. So part of the problem, I think, is that we think we're here. All right, we think that we are, you know, we're still doing things like expressing our basic civil rights. And that shouldn't be a problem. We've already won those rights to speak. We've won the rights to assemble in public, to air our grievances. People fought for hundreds of years to get those rights, especially women. We fought to be able to speak in public, to be able to participate in civic life. Some women are still fighting for those basic rights around the world. Saudi Arabia, I'm looking at you. Iran, go for it. But in the West, we're supposed to have won these rights already, right? It's done, it's finished, we already got it. We're actually here. We're essentially doing direct confrontations with power whenever we gather in public as radical feminists, as quote TERFs. We don't know that, and we're not trained for it. And this is why I feel this urgency about the situation. I don't think we have enough collective understanding as a movement to even make the decision about whether to use this technique of nonviolent direct action or not. So I'm trying my hardest to get this information out there. And so one example that we talk about a lot when we've been doing our trainings is the part of the civil rights movement. There was an action called the Children's Crusade. This was in Birmingham. They ran out of adults essentially who were able to, you know, risk their jobs, risk their lives, risk, you know, everything to do these confrontations. And the only people left who were willing were the high school students, and in fact, some younger kids as well. But they went ahead and did it. And there's incredible footage from the time watching these kids do this action. But my point here is that there's two things. There's the stated purpose of their march, and that was simply to march downtown to the mayor peacefully and talk to the mayor about why segregation was wrong and why they should stop having segregation in Alabama. That's a very reasonable thing to ask for, and they were going to do it very reasonably. That's the stated purpose. The strategic goal, and this is a direct quote, the goal, get a reaction from the racist officials that would not only spotlight the injustice of the South, but gain national attention and support. The goal was not to get safely from point A to point B. The goal was not to stay safe. Quite the opposite. The goal was to get a reaction from racist officials that would make the structural violence visible. And this is always the goal when you're doing actual nonviolent direct action. The violence is there. The violence on which the system depends is revealed when you have a nonviolent challenge. And that nonviolent challenge doesn't create the violence. It doesn't create the reaction. That's there already. It reveals the violence that's been there the whole time. So that's what we try to train women in. We try to get them to understand the history of this technique that, you know, in my lifetime alone, millions of people have used this with great effect around the world. You can get legal reforms, challenges to different things in the law or across society, you know, whatever it is you're confronting. Nonviolence has been used to destroy empires. It's been used to bring down dictators. It's been used to defend legitimate governments from coups. So literally millions of people have used this very successfully. And we can do it too. I think that this is a technique that's ready-made for people in our position. We have no money, we have no power, we have no government agency, we don't have the media, we don't have giant tech companies. We've got pretty much nothing except righteousness on our own courage. So our goal was, again, to make the violence visible. And this case of Dana Rivers, if you don't understand who he was, I would suggest going to Kara Dansky's Substack. She's got really good information all there, all the links you would ever want. But this is a horrible man who's been a, quote, transgender activist for decades. He protested Michigan Women's Music Festival. He's honestly just a horror scene. He wrote 3 books of pornography, 2 of which are still for sale on Amazon, which are completely sadomasochistic, fetishistic, like diaper fetish, like really vile, like just the bottom of the barrel, vile stuff. And then he murdered 2 lesbians and their teenage son, really brutally. The one woman, he stabbed her 40 times, 28 times in the face. They said that she was, quote, unrecognizable. That was how brutal he was. So, this is the trajectory of this movement, and we want people to see that. So we went out to the courthouse. His sentencing is coming up, and there was a big court thing that was happening that day. So we decided, and as it turned out, it was actually the anniversary of the Montreal massacre as well. So it was a very grim day for us. So we decided that we were going to get women trained in this technique. Even if it was a small group of us, we would know it was women who had promised to follow our guidelines of nonviolence. They understood what we were doing, hopefully came to understand the importance of using this technique, how it worked and why it works, that nonviolence is the fulcrum that we've got to lever our cause into the public spotlight. And we did have a small group of us who committed to it. We had a great training all weekend. It's just so wonderful to be in a group of radical feminists or women who are leaning toward radical feminism and really just spend 2 days together talking about really serious political things and whether or not this technique is the best for us. And we just had a great time. So then the day came. So I'm going to turn this over to Jesika and she can do her part.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad for this opportunity to appear on Feminist Question Time again. I spoke around this time last year to discuss Turf Collective. This time I'm here, of course, to discuss our recent demonstration in Oakland, California. The demonstration was held at the Renee Davidson Courthouse, the site of the Dana Rivers murder trial, the morning of the demonstration. We sent 2 women ahead of the rest of us to serve as scouts. These were our camera women. One would be responsible for filming our speeches as well as taking still photos of us throughout the demonstration. Beforehand, we had planned for this woman to blend in with the crowd for her physical safety and to protect her ability to take good photos and footage. We needed her to not be a target of any trans identity supremacists that might seek to attack the rest of us. The second woman was too a camera woman, but her role was also as a general participant. She would be vulnerable to attack like any of the rest of us. This was by design. The second woman wore a body cam that generated all the great footage that is by now seen all over and by so many and opened our presentation today. Sending scouts to survey the scene in advance is always a good idea. What we've learned from over a year of doing these demonstrations of all kinds on this issue is that our opposition likes to camp out. You can trust these trans identity supremacists, especially depending on how large a group they muster, to beat you to your location almost every time. If you're contemplating a demonstration, certainly a public one, you must expect to be greeted by them when you arrive. Because we were prepared to be overrun with trans identity supremacist terrorists, we originally had decided to gather at a staging point where we get our sashes on and get our banners ready, then head to the courthouse together. You want to do this so you don't spend any time being wrestled down by the opposition while you're still unfurling banners. The message is the most important part of the demonstration. This aspect of our plan changed when one of our scouts sent back word she sensed the opposition was already using our chosen staging point as their rally point. So instead, we merely proceeded directly to the courthouse. There was quite conveniently a small sitting area off to the side of the steps where we had chosen to do our speaking. This served as a perfectly suitable staging area. So that is where we pinned our sashes, unfurled our banners, and got ourselves organized. Then we walked a few paces to the steps where we lined up for some photos from our primary camera woman. She took some stills of us at the base of the steps and then cued us to begin our speaking portion. This portion of the demonstration was live streamed to WDI USA's Facebook channel. Please feel free to check that out. Our demonstration was sobering and solemn, reflecting the gravity of the situation. A man has brutally murdered a lesbian couple and their son in their home, and and there are people that fight for him to be construed as the victim, deserving of our empathies, and even worse, our protection. Kara spoke first. She covered the facts of the case, one in which she is now our movement's expert. She spoke out against the injustice that is housing Dana Rivers and many other violent men like him with women. Lierre spoke next. Given the date of our demonstration, just one day off from the anniversary of the École Polytechnique massacre, Lierre couldn't help but be reminded of the price women pay for defying men. I spoke after Lierre. I said that what I know to be the truth, this ideology gained popularity on the misguided belief that men that call themselves trans women are the most harmless and vulnerable of all men. We now know that notion is a complete lie. I also encourage women to find the courage and fortitude within themselves to come out and engage in, as Kara puts it, a record of our dissent. Melinda was our last, and in my opinion, most powerful speaker. She closed our time on the steps by reading a list of the names of those murdered by men that identify as trans women or non-binary. This culminated in a moment of silence for those lives. After we completed our speeches and held a moment of silence for the lives ended by men that consider themselves both trans women and non-binary, we descended and crossed a small street, Fallon Street, and down the hill to Lake Merritt Boulevard to hold our banners so we could face the traffic. I'd suggested lining the street because this way we could at least get our message out to drivers passing by. We stood on Lake Merritt Boulevard for maybe half an hour or so. We received a few honks of support, which is great, but the traffic wasn't dense enough to make it worth staying there. One of the participants suggested walking to the promenade at Lake Merritt, which had much more foot traffic. What you may not really be able to see from the video is there's a lake behind us. Naturally, on a morning with a bit of break from recent rain, people would be strolling by. This, of course, created more opportunities to expose those passersby to our message. It was also suggested this was a great place to take photos, especially ones where you could stand with our back to the courthouse, and that might be very nice to have images of us holding our banners with that courthouse in a more distant background. I now know that the name of that promenade is actually Lake Merritt Amphitheater. So we didn't know that detail at the time. As the name suggests, it's an amphitheater, not strictly a promenade. We arrived at the amphitheater and stood presenting our banners just briefly before a woman approached to engage with us on the substance of our demonstration. This bystander is the woman whose exasperated voice you hear in the body cam recording during the attack. She was actually very pro-trans identifying male when she approached. She told us she could agree with us that Dana Rivers is a man, but feared that he may be subject to violence if housed with men. I would have loved to ask her what she thought about the violence he might inflict on female inmates and whether she thought they might be worthy of our protection as well. But I didn't. We weren't there for that. We were there for the silent vigil in that moment. And also, the trans identity supremacists were already approaching. The attack was swift. I didn't see it coming. At least 6, but maybe as many as 12, mostly men, swarmed quickly and efficiently, though they were completely disguised, betraying their awareness of the fact that they are neither stunning nor brave. We could tell they were men. We could easily tell from the proportions of their bodies. One started by pushing an umbrella, I think, into Kara, the purpose of which I'm still not clear on. Another forced a few of us back by riding his motorcycle directly into us. They pelted us with eggs, pies, and forcefully wrestled our banners away. This group of mostly men had clearly taken the time to orchestrate exactly how they would attack. Our women sustained hits to their heads, faces, necks. And I'm pretty strong, but I was sore for an hour or two from having the banner yanked so forcefully out of my arms. As you can hear from the video, the woman bystander that was so pro-trans woman just moments before then was completely beside herself as and after we were attacked. She couldn't have imagined that anyone would swoop in and blitz us so violently. for being a group of women merely holding banners. If her reaction is any indication, this strategy could indeed be a very good one. So I will stop here for my part and hand it off to Kara.
I wanted to title this, They Show Us Who They Are, Believe Them. And part of the reason I think that's so important is that these violent men are showing us exactly who they are. And I really want all of us who are fighting for the sex-based rights of women and girls to stop being shocked about their absolute misogyny and their absolute violence. So this is a close-up of the side of my head after a man threw a raw egg directly at me. All of the white that you see there is eggshell. And you can't really see very clearly in that photo, but there's raw egg dripping all down that side of my neck and down my chest and into my shirt. And again, you can see all of the eggshell that is plastered all over me and my coat. So that's an even closer one. And you can see sort of how red my ear is. You can see behind me is our friend Melinda, who is calling 911. The police, by the way, were quite interested and wanted to help, but they were unable to locate the men who had attacked us. And of course, the men are not identifiable in any of the videos. So the men who attacked us almost certainly will not be apprehended in any way. So this is Lierre with pie all over her face and head. So this is our friend Arla, who was also hit in the face with a pie. So this is sort of what we dealt with in the aftermath of this violent attack. Nonetheless, we were in quite good spirits. As Lierre said, we did a really good job. We maintained our dignity. We maintained our composure. We did not fight back. We did not yell. We did not taunt. We did not do anything to the men who were attacking us. And, as you can see, we're kind of standing there enjoying our time. So this is another one of us standing there. The women in that particular photo are the ones who took the brunt of the eggs and the pies. The woman on the far right there with the short blonde hair, that's a woman named Amy. She's one of the women who, one of the men ran their bicycle directly into her body. But we're not going to let them, we're not going to let them get us down. So as I said, we remained in good spirits. So we had some good media coverage. Now what you're seeing here is just a screenshot that I took. It's not a video itself, so we're not going to play that. But so this happened on the very day of the action. And I put the URL there, which I know you can't see, but I wanted to put it there sort of for posterity. And I'm happy to share the URLs to the media links that I'm going to provide in the chat. But the point here is that there are the four of us, right? Arla, myself, Lierre, and Jesika. And the reason that we have this is that one of the women who was there to support us, she was on it. As soon as we were done with the action, as soon as the men took off, she said, okay, I need all of you to stand there and we're going to do an interview. And that interview is, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 minutes long. It's very short. But we were able to say exactly what happened. So it was immediately after it happened. It could not have been more fresh in our minds. The woman who recorded us had not herself been ambushed. She arrived moments after the whole thing was over. And she had the presence of mind to say, okay, let's get this interview on tape right now. Because the rest of us, although we were in good spirits, we didn't quite have the presence of mind to know exactly what our next steps should be. But she said, let's do this interview. Almost immediately, she sent it to her friends at the Post Millennial. And we did something that's very important, which is we promised the Post Millennial that they would have exclusive rights to use it. And because we took all these steps really in the immediate aftermath of the action, we were able to get some pretty good coverage in the Post Millennial that day. So this is from the Epoch Times, which came out the following day. Again, I put the URL there. I'm happy to put it in the chat so you can link to it. And this is the video that you watched. We gave the Epoch Times the body camera footage that you have seen, and they got it up in the paper the very next day with some very good coverage, which, really it's framed is exactly as it happened. It's framed as women standing up for women and girls and men attacking us. Okay, so this was the next day. This is in Fox News. This is a man named Jesse Waters has a program, and the guy you're seeing is, of course, Douglas Murray. And Douglas Murray went on and did what I think was overwhelmingly a good interview with Jesse Waters. So it's a great interview, and I hope everyone watches it. And Douglas Murray does a fantastic job of framing this all as men attacking women. He says, this has been going on for a while now. A lot of us have been talking about it, and this is men attacking women. And I thought he really did a fabulous job. What I'm less excited about is the fact that Jesse Waters, in his introduction, framed it as a brawl between trans activists and feminists. And that's not fair, because we were not doing any brawling. We were standing there in silent solidarity with incarcerated women. So if I had been doing that interview, I would have wanted to contradict that narrative. And I didn't think Douglas Murray did quite as good a job as he could have at contradicting that framing. And then I know this is something that many of us struggle with, which is, many of us who were actually there would have been quite pleased to go on and have a conversation about what happened. And, many of us are a little bit tired of watching men talk about this issue, when those of us who are directly impacted would be more than happy to join them. Okay, so then in the next couple of days, Fox News invited me to be on Tucker Carlson, but that had to get rescheduled. I'm sure that's no one's fault. It just happened. But of note, with that, even though it's been less than a week, we're out of the news cycle. That's how fast this goes. Our action is out of the news cycle, within a couple of days. So I just want all of us to be mindful of that. We need to get our media on our actions. We need to turn it all around very quickly. And then our friends showed us who they are. So this is in a magazine called East Bay, Indie Bay. It's an independent, magazine for the San Francisco Bay Area. And when we went back to the house after the action, we were just talking, and I sort of wondered aloud, I wonder what they did with our banners. Well, now we know exactly what they did with our banners. They're quite proud of it. I'm about 99% certain that the man on the left of our screen holding the banner is the guy who threw the egg at my head, because you can see it in the video. And I just want to say, it's interesting to me that this is their tactic, because the man who they stood up for was convicted of arson, in addition to 3 counts of first-degree murder. So to stand up in support of a man who's been convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder, as well as arson, and then yourself to commit arson, is maybe not the best look. This is just more showing them destroying. So I wrote a Substack, which Jesika mentioned and Rosa put in the chat. Thank you so much, Rosa. And I tweeted about it. This is a record of women's dissent. That Substack, as of this morning, it had almost 3,000 views, which is pretty good for my Substack. We're doing it again. So we need to show these men that we're not going to be deterred. What it says on the slide there is that this is scheduled for December 19th. That is the plan as of this moment, but we're talking about possibly exploring different dates. But our plan is to have the exact same banner, go to the exact same location, and execute the exact same plan. And, we will show them we're not going to be deterred. We're going to continue standing up for Patricia Wright and Charlotte Reed and Benny Wright, who were the 3 victims of Dana Rivers' vicious murders, as well as incarcerated women all over California, all over the United States, and all over the world. Thank you very much.
We are showing you today several of the videos of the why I signed the declaration that we were requesting women to record. So we're going to show you some more during the webinar today.
My name is
Welcome.
I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a lifelong progressive, and most of my colleagues, friends, and family also identify primarily with the political left. I signed the Women's Declaration because I've been alarmed at how quickly the language in every facet of culture and public life, especially among people on the left, has shifted to erase women and treat our specific biology, needs, concerns, safety, and privacy as imagined or insignificant. For too long, I assumed that gender ideology simply meant allowing people to express themselves as they wish. But now I realize how regressive this ideology is. I posted about this on social media exactly once and lost several friends as a result. I am forever indebted to WDI and radical feminists everywhere for the clarity of their analysis on this issue, and I intend to stand firm in all spaces where I find myself against this ideology and for the rights and safety of women and girls.
Hi, my name is El Kamihira. I signed the Women's Sex-Based Rights Declaration because I don't believe that the trans movement is a legitimate human rights movement. I think a legitimate human rights movement would not try to demolish another oppressed group's rights, such as women, the largest, violently persecuted group on the planet. And I don't want to be told that it's wrong of us to have boundaries from men. Well, I think all of us have a lifetime of conditioning and training to protect ourselves from male violence and male sexual violence, because that's what they do. And so I'm not going to pretend that men are not dangerous to women, however they identify. Thank you.
I signed the Declaration for so many reasons. The main one, though, is that the United Nations has thrown women under the bus by changing the word sex to gender. This is a direct assault on women and girls' sex-based rights.
I was bombarded a lot with all these queer ideas and how we needed to be kind to these people and how they were the most marginalized people in the world ever in history. And I think they definitely preyed on that kindness we always want to show to everyone. And one day when I got my peak trans, it was a day I was 19 years old, barely of age, and I was in an LGBTQ bar, and I went to the women's bathroom, and there I got assaulted by two trans-identified males, and they hit me when I said that I'm a lesbian and I only like women, so they got very aggressive. And then two other women, probably in their 30s or so, two lesbians, walked in and saw this, and they literally saved me from something worse. And when we went to the manager and said, like, this happened in the bathrooms, do something, they kicked me out because they said I was a transphobe. And that was the start of a lot of things that I said, like, hey, it sounded weird, and a little by little, all these things started to pop out. It doesn't make sense. And I said, where are the women's rights? It's because they said rights are in pie, not because someone gets it, you lose yours. But then I started to notice we are actually losing our rights and our names and our spaces. And I found Women's Declaration International, and I read it completely, and it was like this amazing piece of women's rights that we should not forget. And I signed them, and I joined the webinars. And as Ray said, the webinars are this beautiful space filled with wise, fantastic, and brave women that encouraged me to keep fighting for my rights, for the rights of the women that are coming now, and they have such a difficult arena to develop themselves. Because I remember myself, I was a very tomboyish girl, and I still look very tomboyish. And right now, if I was born 20 years later, I would be definitely being convinced that I was a man, and it is not true. I've learned through these spaces to become very proud of being a woman, of being a lesbian, and to being a feminist that fights for the real end of patriarchy, whether it comes in as a conservative religious patriarchy or as a glittering skirts patriarchy. So for me, Women's Declaration International is a beacon of sanity, of bravery, and a place when I can meet like-minded, fantastic women that are not afraid to be in a witch hunt. We've lost jobs, we've lost friendships and relationships and a lot of things. that the fight is worth it, and these women remind me every day of that.
First, I was a lesbian and a feminist, have been for 40 years. And I am well aware that the root of this is misogyny, and that it is about some sort of backlash. I do believe this, and that the silencing of women yet again, the oppressing of lesbians, the oppressing, just basically men taking over yet again, silencing women, and doing it with violence and aggression. So that is one reason, and I've been an active lesbian feminist for many years in Weibo and so on from the beginning. But apart from that, also for 40 years, I have been a nurse and a midwife and an abortion provider in the NHS. So I ran an abortion service at the same time as being a radical midwife. And I am also very well aware that female fetuses are aborted worldwide. Even in this country, it's more difficult because of the law, but the requests are made, and it's certainly done in exchange for money, because they are female. In the same way that little girls are killed, female infanticide is huge all over the world, and that is because males are prized because of patriarchy. Now, this is an issue that is not being raised enough, I don't think, because these little girls and these female fetuses cannot identify as anything. So this whole nonsense, going back to being a midwife, of babies being assigned a sex at birth is absolute nonsense when you look at female infanticide and the aborting of female fetuses, which I have to say is all because of men. Women do not themselves want their female fetuses aborted. It is because of coercion and pressure and often aggression from men. And I have seen this, having been providing abortion for nearly 30 years. And the third reason is I was also an active trade unionist in what was mainly a women's union, because 80% of the women were women on very low pay. So women who were cleaners and linen workers, laundry workers, kitchen staff, and so forth. And women all over the world earn less, have the most appalling working conditions, and work harder physically in many ways than men, and have no way of escaping that. And so for me, it is an absolute insult for men to be pretending that they are so oppressed because they feel they are in the wrong bodies, or they want to identify as the opposite sex, when they have absolutely every advantage over females who are born female. And there is absolutely no way. I've dealt with so much female genital mutilation. The women who I've delivered have suffered the most appalling fistulas and infections, and it is just, it makes me so angry. So yes, those three reasons really.